My name's Les George. My father is from Squamish Nation. My mother is from Tsleil-Waututh. And I'm the Indigenous Storyteller for the Vancouver Public Library. Today I'd like to share one of the teachings as a knowledge keeper. I'm one of the knowledge keepers for Tsleil-Waututh. And one of my teachings as a knowledge keeper is to tell stories. And today the story I'd like to share is about one of our great warriors, Waut-Salk, his name is. And when we tell legends, we tell them to honor our warriors, or our matriarchs, or our chiefs, and we also tell legends to teach lessons. So that's part of the story, and also a little bit of history. So that's the story I'd like to share today is Waut-Salk. Now Waut-Salk, he was one of our great young men who became a really good warrior, who became a really great chief. Now Waut-Salk had a really big heart, and on days like today when he would wake up, he would look outside and it was so nice out that he would give thanks. On days like during the winter time when it snowed really hard, Waut-Salk would also give thanks to days like that too. He was grateful and thankful for snowy days too. And on stormy, rainy, windy days, he would also be thankful for those. And when he would get up in the morning, he would wake up and he would share this song. Wanina, 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 wanina. Now, when Waut-Salk would carry on his day after he'd share that song, he was one of the keepers of the land and keepers of the people. And what I mean by that is he would make his way around throughout Tsleil-Waututh. Tsleil-Waututh means people of the inlet, and that's who I am. That's who my mother was. That's who my grandparents was, and so on, for a few generations. And Waut-Salk, he was a keeper of the people. And what I mean by that is he would go around and he would check in on everybody and make sure that everybody was doing okay. That's just a big heart that Waut-Salk had. Now when he would go do that, what I was told is that Tsleil-Waututh was 12 to 14,000 strong. Now Waut-Salk, and it ran from Stanley Park all the way up to Indian River, up into Tsleil-Waututh, which is where our salmon village is. So Waut-Salk, he would maintain all these lines. He would make sure everything was okay. Now when Waut-Salk would walk into a room, there would be children. In our language we say manmans. Manmans means children. When Waut-Salk would walk into a room, they would be grateful for him, and they would come up to him and they would uppies him, and he would give them all hugs. And same with when he'd see the teenagers and the older children. They would come to him too. They would be drawn to the powers of Waut-Salk. And now when he talked to the young adults, they would listen to him. And same with when he came with the elders. The elders too would gather around Waut-Salk and they would listen to the words that he would say. Now Waut-Salk's powers go beyond that. Now what I mean by that is he had a special kind of powers. And I don't mean powers like Superman or Spider-Man. I'm talking about powers of communication. And I don't mean the way that I'm talking right now. I mean powers of communication with the winged ones. When Waut-Salk was walking along trails, he would look up and there would be eagles flying above him. And Waut-Salk, he would give thanks and he would say hello to the eagles. And I'm also talking about the ravens and the hawks. And all the way down to the little hummingbird. They would come down and they would fly around Waut-Salk and he would say hello to them too. And that also goes for the four-leggeds. Now in our trails would run parallel to each other. Now I'm talking when Waut-Salk would walk down to a creek, there would be a deer there. And the deer would get startled. And Waut-Salk would look at it and he would get a little bit startled too. But then they would both know who each other were. and they would carry on their ways. Now Waut-Salk, when he'd walk other trails that would run parallel to each other, there would be a four-legged, like a bear, walking that trail, and Waut-Salk would be walking the same trail alongside of that bear. And they would both know each other were there, but they both know that they weren't there to harm each other, and they would carry on their ways. Those powers, they also ran with the finned ones. I'm talking about the seals, the salmon, the Yout-Yoats. Yout-Yoats is killer whale in our language. Now, when he was paddling on the water in the inlet, there would be salmon splashing around him. And he would greet the salmon too. There would be seals that would pop up really close to him, and he would say hello to them too. Now with those powers came responsibility. And as I mentioned, we were very big Tsleil-Waututh, about 14,000. And Waut-Salk made sure that he took care of each and every one of them. Now our salmon village, if you keep going east along the inlet, which is Indian River and Indian Burrard Inlet, those two meet up. And when those two meet up, you're in a place called Tsleil-Waututh. Tsleil-Waututh. Now Tsleil-Waututh is our salmon village. And our salmon season is September, October, and November. And that's when our salmon season is up in Tsleil-Waututh. And Waut-Salk knew this beforehand. He knew when the salmon were coming. Now, what would happen is that he would get the sign, and he would tell all the other Tsleil-Wautuths, oh, go grab your nets. It's time to get up to the salmon village. Oh, the salmon are coming. Time to make your way up there. And they would listen to his words. Now Waut-Salk, he would make sure that each and every Tsleil-Waututh got up to Tsleil-Waututh. And as a Tsleil-Waututh, each family had their own canoe. So they would start making their way up to Tsleil-Waututh. And in their canoes, they would paddle their way up there. Now Waut-Salk, he would sit at one of our villages. Waut-Salk was one of the main ones that he would sit at. Waut-Salk was our summer village. And if you've ever been there and you've been on the point, if you look west, you can see what now is downtown Vancouver. If you looked east, you would see that the water goes all the way up to Tsleil-Waututh. So that would be a good place for Waut-Salk to wait. And he would wait for every Tsleil-Waututh canoe to go by. And as they would paddle by, he would sing the song to them as they would go by. Now Waut-Salk, he would sit there sometimes for hours, maybe days, making sure that every Tsleil-Waututh got by. Because Tsleil-Waututh lived on about 80 to 85% of salmon. So that was the importance of the salmon, and for all of Tsleil-Waututh to get up to the salmon village. Now I've been up to the salmon village a couple times, and I've been up there in the summertime, and I've swam in the waters. And the river is really, really refreshing and really, really clear. When you look down to the bottom of the river, I can see the rocks. I can sometimes see little fish flying around. I can see the sand. And it's just so relaxing and so refreshing. But I've also been there during the salmon season. And when I've been there in the salmon season, the water in that river that I just talked about is as black as my paddle jacket here. Because there's so many salmon in that river that from one wall to the next wall, that if the salmon were slippery, you could walk across that river on their backs. And that's how many salmon are in there. And I've seen these salmon in there. And I've seen that much salmon in there myself with my own eyes. Now Waut-Salk, as I mentioned, was one of the keepers of the land. And he was also a keeper of the people. So when he got up there, he would paddle up in his own canoe. And when he got up there were these two boys. And they were about maybe 8 to 12 years old. And they too were down the river. And while all the other Tsleil-Waututh were setting up for the salmon season, these two boys were down the river looking at these salmon in the water. They're grabbing rocks the size of their hands and throwing them in the river, knocking the salmon dead. They're grabbing rocks bigger than my drum and throwing them in, splashing the salmon up right out of the water. And they wouldn't live, they would die. Now Waut-Salk, he's seen this, and he came to these boys and he told them that these aren't our ways, these aren't our teachings. This isn't how we treat the salmon. And they kind of just giggled and said, oh yeah, and they ran off away from Waut-Salk. Now Waut-Salk, with the big heart he had, he jumped back in his canoe after he seen who was all up in the salmon village. And he came down, paddled around, and then came back up. And he told everyone to start getting ready for the season. And then he left his canoe on the water and he walked down the trail. Now Waut-Salk, he was always one of the first ones awake. In every village that he stayed in, he was always the first one awake. So the next morning, the same two boys, they came down to the river again and they looked and they seen Waut-Salk's canoe on the beach. But they didn't know that Waut-Salk walked down the trail to find any more Tsleil-Wautuths. And he left pretty early. So those two boys, seeing Waut-Salk's canoe on the beach, they started breaking branches from the trees. One of the boys started golfing the salmon out, knocking the salmon dead. The other boy started reaching in and flicking them up, and baseball batting them, knocking the salmon dead. Now Waut-Salk, he came out of the trail and he's seen this. And he's like, I told you boys, this isn't how we treat the salmon. And he's like, and what you guys are doing is wrong. Now Waut-Salk, he walked into the water and he walked waist high. And this is during September, October, November, when that river gets really cold. Now Waut-Salk, he walked into the water up to his waist and he started singing, Wanina, 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 and by the time Waut-Salk had finished singing his song, the salmon had left the river and swam back into the inlet, into the salt water. They left the fresh water and swam into the salt water. Now the rest of the Tsleil-Wautuths came down and they seen that there was no salmon in the river. And they knew the powers of Waut-Salk, so they turned and they asked Waut-Salk, why did you do this? Why did you make the salmon leave? And Waut-Salk told them, he's like, I didn't tell the salmon to leave. And he told them what the boys had been doing. He's like, I told the salmon what the boys were doing, and they left on their own. Now the Tsleil-Wautuths, they couldn't reach the salmon with their nets, with their hooks, or with their traps. So what they did, this goes for my community, the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and many other First Nations throughout Canada, and I believe many other communities throughout the Lower Mainland and everywhere. And that saying is, it takes a whole community to raise a child. I'm sure a lot of you have heard it before. Now, saying this, all the Tsleil-Wautuths gathered and they took these boys aside and they told them the importance of the salmon. And they told them how we needed it to get through the winters. And these boys got it in their head and in their mind. And there's a word for that. If you get it in your heart and your mind, and we all get it in our heart and our mind, it's one heart, one mind. Not samat. Not samat. One heart, one mind. And these boys got it. So that night, there's markings of a big house up in our salmon village. So we know that these boys went to that big house, and that was a full big house. It was huge. And all the Tsleil-Waututh are all gathered around, and these boys, as scared as they were, they walked into the middle of the big house, and they apologized. We're sorry for what we have done. We know what we have done is wrong, and we won't let it happen again. We understand. And the family members stood up, and they told the boys, it's not us you need to apologize to. They turned to Waut-Salk. They said, we're sorry for what we have done. We know what we have done is wrong. We won't let it happen again. Now Waut-Salk, he told them, it's not me you need to apologize to. So in our culture, in our teachings, and I know myself, a lot of us Tsleil-Waututh have one of these, a drum. A drum is medicine for our people, and a drum is power for our people. And it's also a way of communication. Now these boys, they too had their own drums. And that next morning, they woke up before Waut-Salk. And they too walked down to the river. And then they walked into the water, and they started singing this song. Juanita, Juanita, ay, ay, Juanita, ay, ay, Juanita, ay, ay, ay. And by the time those two boys had finished singing their song, the salmon had swam back into the river, and the Tsleil-Waututh had got their harvest for the season. I thank you for listening to the words that I share with you guys and listening to the story that I tell you. Oh, see you.